So,
right. So good afternoon. I'm Shauna Stefanczyk, and we have Jocelyn Strand from DESE to give us some MSIP 6 updates and answer questions. So Jocelyn, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
fantastic. Shauna, thank you for having me. And I know that many of you may have been aware that we had a public meeting just this past Monday related to MSIP 6. And so I want to also let you know that in addition to that, we will be hosting a second meeting on September the 7th from 1:30 to 3:30 at the Department of Natural Resources building. It's 1730 East Elm Street. Again, that's on September the 7th. That's a Wednesday. So I'm probably not going to get into a ton of detail right now because it is really an hour and a half to 2-hour presentation, but let me go ahead and give you a little bit of update about where we are, what we're working on, and what you can expect. As you know, we've been working over the last several months on making sure that that comprehensive guide is absolutely the best document that we can put forward for our stakeholders. And a final version, and I'm saying a final version, I'm going to say a final draft version of that document is now available on the MSIP 6 webpage. That particular document will indeed include the targets for status for both the group of all students and the student group. And the student group is the historically underperforming groups of students. So in Missouri, that includes our students with disabilities, English learners, Hispanic, Black, and then free and reduced price lunch has typically been that measure for accountability purposes only. And I want to reiterate that for accountability purposes only, we will be utilizing direct certification. And that direct certification allows us to provide provide some differentiation between our group of all students and our student group. For districts who were implementing CEP or the community eligibility provision, we were essentially evaluating those districts twice for those very same population of students. So we've made that modification. So I just want to go over just a few little bits in terms of the MSIP policy goals. I know we mentioned those the last time. I would like to just run through them again in terms of the implementation of those policy goals so that you are familiar with that. The very first goal has always been to articulate the state's expectations for not only high student achievement, but improvement in student performance. And we listened to our stakeholders very carefully. In MSIP 6, you will notice that there is a difference between the calculation of points, for lack of a better word, of those items. So status will be one calculation and it will stand on its own. And the second calculation will be for growth. And I'm just going to give you just a brief update. This APR is going to be released in 2 phases. There will be an APR that is released in the fall, and it will include everything but growth and the continuous improvement items that are not measured on an annual basis. So the continuous school improvement plan, the response to the standards, and the survey information will not be included in the APR in the fall. We will include growth information for the final 2022 APR, the phase 2 of this year's APR, sometime in the spring. At that time, we will host yet another public meeting, so individuals will be able to provide feedback before we post that document publicly, and districts will be able to see that. This should allow us to distinguish the performance of districts and schools. Providing accessible and actionable information is another one of our pretty important things. It's been important to me, providing information to our public in a way that's easily digestible for them to understand. And so we'll be doing 2 separate APRs, a version that districts will see securely prior to the release, and then a public facing version that will be done using primarily visualizations. So you can anticipate seeing that, and it'll be in a format that will be much easier for our public to understand. We continue to focus on the welfare of each of our individual students and their preparation for whatever stage comes next for them. So if you'll recall in MSIP 5, that was primarily our students who were leaving us to go to some other post-secondary experience, but this will include information about the number of students a district evaluates to see if they're school ready. And then it will include the individual's course planning tool, the ICAP, about information on their course plan as they enter high school and whether or not that document is reviewed regularly and used to assess whether or not the student is on track. And then we'll continue to measure some of those college and career readiness things that you've come to know: AP, IB, dual credit, industry recognized credentials, and those items. We're hoping that this will encourage our districts and allow them to continue to make improvement and to tell their own story through the continuous improvement mechanism. But then we'll also be recognizing excellence for those districts who perform well, but then also offering our districts an opportunity to apply for exemplary status based on their continuous improvement review. So that will be another way for us to recognize our schools for doing outstanding work. We've had a lot of stakeholder engagement, and this meeting is one opportunity for us, this podcast, one opportunity for us to do that. You know, when we've talked before on the podcast, we talked about the development of the standards and indicators and even our metrics, and we've had lots of stakeholder involvement in that. Something new to MSIP 6 was the public comment period that we had open for the comprehensive guide in March. We have never done that before, and we received a lot of great feedback that kind of helped inform some of the changes that we made from the first comprehensive guide. We've held some moderated Q&A sessions, and then these 2 public meetings that I mentioned, the one on August 22nd, and then again a second that we'll hold on September the 7th. So talk a little bit about the metrics and scoring. As I mentioned, we had a lot of feedback about the importance of recognizing growth and status, and to ensure that they're equally weighted. And so we are continuing to evaluate that to make sure we implement that in the most appropriate way possible. And that's why we have a phase A and a phase B, or phase 1 and phase 2 of the 2022 APR. And then you'll know that we also have some success ready measures, attendance, the ICAP, and the kindergarten entry assessment, which is really a school readiness assessment that will be included in the annual performance report every year. So just a quick review of the changes, the key changes that are being implemented in the 2022 APR. In the prior version of MSIP, 100% of the APR was based on student performance. And a lot of districts reminded us that their student performance doesn't tell the whole story of what they were doing. in their agency, their local education agency. And so we've worked really hard to include the continuous improvement and the student performance component. And that continuous improvement component allows our districts and our charter schools to tell the story of what they're doing. It may tell us what they're doing to improve student outcomes, what they're doing to improve students' readiness for post-secondary experiences. It gives us an opportunity to see what's happening. For academic achievement, we have utilized a discrete MPI for the past number of years. And that was a 1, 3, 4, and 5. So if you had a student in below basic, it was a 1. If you had a student in basic, it was a 3. Proficient, it was a 4. Advanced, it was a 5. Within each one of those ranges, we know that students perform very differently, right? So a student who is performing at the bottom of below basic may perform very differently than a student who's at the very top of that performance range. And to recognize that, one, there is that very different continuum, but also to recognize improvement within that range, we are implementing a continuous MPI, which allows us to take the skill score and convert that to an MPI that is between 1 and 2.9, 3 and 3.9, 4 and 4.9.
Okay.
Big transition. And so we're excited about it and hope that our districts find that information valuable as well. For the denominator for our student groups, we are making the transition from free and reduced price lunch, as I mentioned earlier, to using direct certification. Direct certification numbers will be smaller. I want to also tell you that we are still accounting for every student. So even if the student is not included in the denominator for your student group population, they are included in your all student group population. So there's really no fallout. It essentially means that if a district is CEP, that they are not going to have academic achievement data for their student group that essentially mirrors the
As with those districts that they're all free and reduced, everybody qualifies.
the student population for your student groups. So it'll essentially be 2 separate populations. We did continue to include attendance. It's 4 points out of the 200 points possible. And it will be a return to the 90-90 attendance rate. So just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. For the end of course assessment, there has been a lot of conversation about this, so I just want to make sure we kind of clarify this a little bit. When a student is awarded credit for the course, so meaning when you have provided the content for that student and the instruction at that level, that student should be assessed on the end of course assessment. So if you have an 8th grade student who participates in an Algebra 1 course, they should, if they have passed the course, be assessed on the Algebra 1 assessment. So credit's not tied directly to whether or not the high school is issuing the credit for it, whether or not they've successfully completed the content. Okay. We have populations of students who this year are sophomores, juniors, and seniors who may not have taken the Algebra 1 assessment in the most recently completed school year. This takes effect for the current school year, the 22-23 school year. So those sophomores, juniors, and seniors will have a graduate level L&D as well. So we will be looking for that. And then also remember that the advanced math content guidance that we have been providing for several years still is in effect. And if you have questions about that, it is in the comprehensive guide. And we are happy to answer any questions that you may have about that when you review that document. And then finally, the continuous improvement component will be phased in, and that data will be included for the first time in the 23-24 annual performance report. And that is the first time that school districts will be classified in MSIP 6 under the new standards, indicators, and metrics. So just a reminder that that is for the 23-24 school year. Really important to note that each year we'll add an additional year's worth of data. So for every single standard and indicator in the 2022 annual performance report, it will be based on 1 year of data. So your academic achievement data will be based on 1 year. Your success ready student metrics, your graduation rate data will all be based on the same 1 year worth of data. And it's really, the difference is that trying to compare pre-pandemic numbers to post-pandemic numbers is difficult and not appropriate. And that's something else you'll want to remember. You will not be able to compare this annual performance report to prior versions of the report. So everybody's a little interested in the targets, and I understand that. And the comprehensive guide is really the best source for those because I could read them out loud to you, but that is a great reference document, and it has all of that information available in the document itself. Let me tell you a little bit about how we went about establishing those targets. Missouri students need to return to pre-pandemic levels of performance. And so we continued to look at that, improving student performance over time, our movement from a discrete MPI to a continuous MPI, closing the gap between our group of all students and our student group, and then finally aligning our targets with the ambitious yet attainable targets that are outlined in the department's strategic plan. So we took all of those things into consideration when those targets were set. So what you'll notice when you look at the comprehensive guide is that you'll see targets for the group of all students, but you'll also see targets for the student group. You'll notice that very little growth information is included, but that will be included in the revised guide in phase 2, phase B of the 2022 annual performance report. I'm trying to make sure that I cover everything that most everybody is interested in, and I'm thinking that I'm close. Again, the reporting will be in 2 separate documents. One, the secure document that the district can look at or charter can look at prior to our public release. And then the public version is really designed to give our parents and other stakeholders who are not as familiar with the education lingo an opportunity to have a clear picture about how their students are performing. And so I think that, Shauna, that's my update. And I'm happy to take any questions that your participants may have for me.
Awesome. So if you would like to come off mute and ask a question, please feel free to do so, or I'll watch the chat if you'd like to put it in there. I'm going to be shocked if there's no questions.
I will be shocked if there are no questions. I see that my friend Katie Rowe is on it.
I'm glad that was a good,
Almost
that was a good word to
has a
choose, Jocelyn.
question for me.
I do.
Just introed you.
Guilty as charged. I do. I wrote down a couple of quick questions. One is for the Success Ready data that's available right now under web apps. Do you anticipate between now and the appeal or the MOSIS ID cleanup that there will be more vendor data that you receive, like i.e. AccuPlacer, work
There-
keys?
Katie, that is a great question and very.
I about had a heart
timely.
attack, Jocelyn.
That is, well, I don't want anybody to have a heart attack. Please note that we are, because we're working to implement this essentially like all over. It feels like a little starting from scratch. That data is not yet loaded, but will be shortly.
Okay.
And an administrative memo will go out letting districts know that we are going to extend that time frame a little bit
Okay.
to allow them plenty of opportunity to look at that. So Katie, that's a great question. Thank you for
Okay.
asking it.
Good. I was like, I'm going to send the biggest appeal yet. No, I'm kidding. I won't. I'll be patient. No, I'll be patient until the data
Oh,
comes.
please
in.
be patient because we probably will send it back to you and say, wait until we get this part done.
Okay, I will. Two more quick questions. One is, I know that you referenced finding targets and whatnot in the MSIP guide. I do know that the status targets are not in there. It still says fall 2022. Is there a timeline for that?
It should be in there. So if you're looking at a version of the comprehensive guide on our website that does not include targets, you might want to refresh your browser or your history because it may be picking up the older version.
Okay. I think
There
I
was a
just
version
clicked on,
released on last Thursday or Friday that should have the targets in there.
okay, I was just using Shauna's link in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, we got that right off the website. So I thought it was the right one, but
Okay, so if that is, let me, Shauna, can I send out a link?
that would be
And it
ideal.
should
Yeah,
have the targets in there. So if they are not in there, I'm gonna pull it up while we're talking.
perfect. We were just trying to throw that in the chat for participants.
And
Katie,
then
you have
my
another one?
last question is, I think I had heard rumblings that there was going to be a new set of state reporting codes that would be published for EOC courses.
There was some initial conversation about that, and I know that it is entirely possible that it may still happen. Here's what I told everyone at the public meeting is that if you use Algebra 1, English 2, biology, or American government, and you use the correct sequence code, you should be fine. So for instance, English 2 seems to be our hardest for whatever reason, because there's not an English 2 course.
Mhm.
Everybody offers different things for their students, right? But if you offer a mythology class and what else could they take? Black literature, and they take those as a sophomore, and that is counting as their second year of English, then your sequence code would be a 2, and we'll be able to pick those up. And the same thing will happen if you have students who are in,
What do you mean by sequence code?
it's where they take the course at. So
Oh,
there
okay.
are some sequence code options available for districts to report. It's part of the MOSIS core data that trying to get everybody to use those correctly will help us be able to do that. And so biology is sort of the same way because we have sophomores who take biology, or they may be in a project lead the way course that is related to biology. And that's when that student would take the end of course assessment, or just the regular biology, or they may be in an ag course where they're going to take the biology course. But as long as the district is using the correct sequence for that course, meaning that they typically take biology at their sophomore level, we will be able to pick those up.
Okay, so I think I'm following you, but I have one specific example, and that is with special education students in Algebra 1.
Mhm,
So these would be students who are kind of like a resource student.
mhm.
They're not quite in a class within a class setting, but they're not, in a self-contained. And so they have a sped teacher who provides the majority of their instruction in Algebra 1.
Okay.
We typically would do Algebra 1 content during that 4th year of the sped math class.
Okay,
So is that one where we would want to make sure that we use the Algebra 1 state code for
Yes.
that? So that it triggers right test
Yes.
at right time for those kids?
yes,
Okay, I'm on
Yep.
it then.
yep, exactly.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Katie.
And here's a couple questions in the chat. When you spoke about not using the free and reduced lunch and using the direct certification, is that referring to the subgroups when we look at the MAP EOC scores, or can you direct to a place in the manual to find that?
Sure. So it is, there is a discussion about that in the manual. Let me find the exact page for you. I apologize. I should know this backwards and forwards, and I do, but I don't have page numbers in my brain. So there is a, on page 24, you can look at that. There is also some language when we talk about student groups. So if you'll remember, and I'm gonna use this word, I'm only gonna use it once. If you remember in MSIP 5, we had a score that was specifically about student subgroups. Only time I'm using that was converted to the student group population. That population has always only been those 5 historically underperforming groups of students. And so there is discussion in the comprehensive guide that talks about the inclusion of those 5 historically underperforming groups of students. And there is language about the use of direct certification in there. So, Shauna, I can't find it just right off, but I can send you the page numbers after we're done.
Yes, if you'll, I will post a video of this and the updated link to the comprehensive plan, and I can put the page number in there. And then
Perfect.
another question from Laura is just to clarify, when they have an 8th grade student who earns Algebra 1 credit, they have them take that EOC this spring, and then the student does not, that 8th grader then no longer takes the MAP test.
That's correct. And this is one of those things I wanted to remind everyone, and it's the math plan. So the very next assessment for that student would be Algebra 2 in high school. We have a number of school districts who worry that their Algebra 1 students are included in the high school data and not in the building level APR and not in the building where they're attending. They are counted in the building where they're attending. That's where the instruction is provided. So you'll have in your achievement level reports, when you can see them, you'll have grade 8 students, you'll see algebra, and you'll also see the grade 8 math, but those are combined with all of the other math scores when we're calculating performance for math. So just know that if they are successful and have mastered the content, and that is when they should take the assessment.
All right, any other questions for those of you on the call? You had also mentioned a podcast. Do you do a podcast?
Well, I was thinking, Shauna, this was your podcast, so there you go.
Okay, that's okay. I was just making sure there wasn't something separate. Nope, that's fine.
No.
Okay,
there's
I
not
was like, hey, we're
anything
missing
separate.
out. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. And again, when I put this recording, I'll remind everyone of that meeting on September 7th that they could attend, where it would be a lot more informational. You kind of gave us the highlight overview to go to that guide, and then attending these meetings could be very
And you're correct. And I am looking at a version of that guide that does not have the targets included, and I will make sure that's reposted. And Sean, I will send it to you and you can send it to the participants.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Katie, did you find that on our website?
Yes, I did.
Perfect. I was hoping it was correct. So, Shauna, I don't
Got
know
it.
if it's a browser.
Yeah, I don't know. We just found the wrong one on there.
Okay, sometimes when you have it in your history, it will pull up something from prior. So I'm not certain, but Katie, thank you.
So when you type in comprehensive plan for MSIP 6, the first thing that pops up is the comprehensive guide, but it's the first one, not the second one.
So that's it. That's how we got the wrong one there. So
Okay.
we'll
So
post
we've
it.
got we have some things that are kind of hiding out in there. So is it when you Googled that, or was it in our
Search.
search?
So no, so when I Googled comprehensive plan for MSIP 6, the first thing that pops up is MSIP 6, Missouri Department of Elementary Education Comprehensive Guide Draft.
And
So
it's
when you click on it, it's the older one, I guess, not the
it's
newer
the
one.
older one. Perfect. We'll get that out of our history piece so that people are
Cool.
not confused by which version they find. Thank you for that feedback. That's very helpful.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
You're welcome.